Hi folks, it's James here. How are you all doing? So welcome to this video. Just a couple of technical points to begin with. The washing machine is on a cycle outside. It might start to get very loud, so you might hear that. My son's in the kitchen playing a video game, so you'll hear him shouting and screaming occasionally. And also the lighting in here is a bit strange. It's a really hot day today. I've got the light pouring in, so you might find the lights a little bit distracting, but let's just go with it, shall we? So I'm going to do a video today looking at albums which I listened to in the 1990s, and this is something I've been meaning to do for a long time. I did do something similar a few years back. I kind of did a general video looking at the music I was listening to back in the 90s, but I've never done a year by year thing. First one, this came out in 1990, and it is the album Happiness by The Beloved, who were a duo. They had been a kind of indie band, maybe a four-piece, and they narrowed themselves down to a two-piece. John Marsh, and I can't remember the other guy's name. I'll put it on the screen. They turned themselves into a kind of blissed out electronic pop act. Really, it was just in the sort of period after ecstasy had flooded into the country, so we had the kind of Manchester thing and the Happy Mondays, and there was a lot of quite good Class A recreational drugs floating around, and the Beloved turned themselves into this very blissed out pop combo with gorgeous tunes, smooth strings. It was all kind of designed to be, I think it was designed as a chill out album to be listened to by ravers who'd come home from the clubs. But what I liked about it was that it was song based. Loads of that electronic dance music in the 90s was not song-based, it was instrumental, it was built on loops, and it was built for the dance floor, whereas The Beloved found a way of doing very British-sounding pop songs, using that style of music, and it was very gentle lyrically. I mean, they're all love songs, pretty much. There's a great run of love songs on this record, starting with track 3, Time After Time, Don't You Worry, and then on side 2 you've got I Love You More, really nice, almost sentimental love songs. Then you've got the kind of rave tracks, which are still done as songs. So The Sun Is Rising is an absolutely beautiful song. I mean, it sounds like, the musical evocation of dawn breaking. I used to listen to that obsessively in the car all the time, driving around. I think it was in the record collection of some friends of mine, and that's how I strayed into its orbit. 1991, I'll show this one. This is Bandwagon-esque by Teenage Fanclub. This is the first of their records that I ever heard, and for years and years I thought it was their first album. I bought this when I was in my third year as a student here in Lancaster. So I bought it from a bookshop. We used to have a campus bookshop on the university campus, but they had a rack of CDs. It was one of those revolving racks that you used to get of CDs in bookshops. This was a very significant record for me. It was one of maybe 2 or 3 bought right at the start of the 90s, really, when I was properly starting to check out the music that was happening around me. So I bought this at the same time pretty much as things like Screamadelica by Primal Scream, various other things, I can't quite remember now. I mean, the Stone Roses album, Crowded House, Woodface, there was a few at the same time. This one, though, was my favourite. Fantastic Scottish indie rock, drawing on the Byrds, drawing on Big Star, wonderful massed stacked harmonies, an air of wistful melancholy, fantastic guitar sounds. I mean, Teenage Fanclub were basically Oasis before their time, but with better songs. They were signed to Creation Records. Noel Gallagher came along, and he basically stole their guitar sound and turned it into Oasis. If you listen to their second album, 13, it's quite uncanny at times. I preferred Teenage Fanclub to Oasis. I thought they were much more lovable. I thought they were a cleverer band. I thought they had better tunes, better lyrics, and that was just a fantastic record. Right, for 92, I'm gonna slightly cheat because this was an artist who'd been around for a while. This is Thomas Dolby and his 4th or 5th album, Astronauts and Heretics. This was the last album he made for many years. After this, he disappeared into the wilderness and went off to design the polyphonic ringtone for mobile phones, and he was out of action for about 15 years. This record, I got into this the year I graduated, the summer I graduated, and it was a bit of a departure for Thomas Dolby because he kind of completely shed all pretense at being an electronic or a new wave artist, and he kind of went adult contemporary, but I've always loved it. The songwriting on it is just very windswept, widescreen, cinematic, and he's just got some great tunes on it. The song Cruel features a guest vocal by Eddie Reader from Fairground Attraction, and it's a beautiful song, absolutely brilliant. I Love You Goodbye, the opening track, is a kind of Cajun number, really great, really clever lyrics. His lyric writing on this album became quite filmic, they're like little movies. Silk Pyjamas is one which is like a kind of short story set down in New Orleans, I think it is, about this girl he's going out with who just wanders off into the night wearing silk pyjamas and he's trying to find her. Really interesting songs. Actually, I think Thomas Dolby always excelled in that. I Live in a Suitcase is another brilliant number with a really, really atmospheric backing track and this great kind of soaring vocal. Great album. Okay, so moving to 93, and this was a really big album for me. This is possibly my favourite album of the 90s. This is Bang by World Party, who I'd never heard of until I bought this record, and I can't remember for the life of me how I came by this. It was probably from listening to the radio. In the early 90s, I used to listen a lot to the Bob Harris radio show. He was a British DJ, and he played a lot of good contemporary releases. That's probably where I heard it. So on this album you've got the song Is It Like Today, which it just sounded like all the music I'd loved when I was growing up. It's got a classic kind of soft rock sound. It sounds like Wings, Supertramp, ELO, a bit of Bob Dylan. It's got a kind of folky vibe to it, but with a sort of electronic or contemporary twist. Carl Wallinger, brilliant songwriter, so underrated, and this was a huge record for me in the summer of 1993. Bang, it was their third album. This was the album that he made when he was starting to narrow World Party down, because they had started out as a band. At this point he turned it into a bit of a kind of auteur project really, when it was just him and maybe a couple of guys with him, but they were not really a band as such. It was more like a sort of Todd Rundgren kind of thing. Great album, World Party. Bang! Okay, so in the 90s I did get very, very heavily into dance music and the rave scene and club culture, but most of the music from that period I don't think particularly has survived for me anyway. It's not music I listen to at home. I kind of pull it out once in a while for nostalgic reasons, but I don't particularly listen to it. This record would fall into that category, but I thought I would show it because it was a really significant record for me, one of the greatest gigs I ever went to. This is the Prodigy and Music for the Jilted Generation. I actually saw them a couple of years after this though. I saw them at the Phoenix Festival in '96, and I think that at that point they were on the next album, they were on Fat of the Land, because he did Firestarter at that gig, I remember, and it was just the most amazing concert. They blew David Bowie off the stage, I think personally. You know, Bowie came on next and his sound was nothing like the Prodigy. I mean, they were truly, it was a sort of cataclysm of beats and just pounding samples. It was just amazing. And this bunch, I mean, they were all over the TV, they were on Top of the Pops. They were such an interesting outfit. They were so aggressive and febrile, and they had that kind of energy of the Sex Pistols, but they mixed it with all the breakbeat stuff that was going on around at the time, and drum and bass, and it was just, you know, when I first heard it I thought, God, this is really horrible music, but I got more into it as time went on. And I couldn't leave it out of the list really, because it was definitely a record which soundtracked my life for a certain period, you know, in the mid-90s. Okay, so 1995, and we'll go with this one. This is Supergrass and I Should Coco. I picked this album for 95 because I needed one for 95, but I wasn't enormously enamoured by this record. I bought it probably from hearing a radio thing, I don't know, or perhaps reading about them in the NME, and I thought it was a good album. I thought it was kind of good, energetic, you know, brisk, kind of indie rock with a bit of a retro feel to it. But it was really only from their second album onwards, which is In It For The Money, that I really fell for Supergrass, when they started to do more experimental songs and they started to wear their 60s and 70s influences more firmly on the sleeve. This one has got a very punky sound to it, and like I said, I liked it when it came out, but for me they were going to go on to do much better stuff than this. But yeah, I thought I would share that one. for 95. 96, now this is an artist, I'm surprised I've never really spoken at length about him on my channel. I've done a couple of videos where I've mentioned him, but I've never really talked about him in any depth, and I will do that at some point. This is Beck and Oasis, and I thought Beck was the second coming in the 90s. The first album I got by him was the one previous to this, the one with Loser on it. The reason I picked it up was because everybody was talking about him in music papers. You know, any music star interviewed at some point during the mid-90s, if they were asked the question, what are you listening to, they would just say Beck. You've got to hear Beck, you know, everybody. So I went to check him out, and I bought a record. This was the second album by him that I got, and this was the one that totally blew my mind, and I listened to it non-stop for about 2 years, you know. And what Beck did for me is that he made kind of hip-hop music explainable to me. I'd never really been into hip-hop, still not really into hip-hop really. There's a few artists that I like, but generally speaking, hip-hop doesn't have enough tunes for me. You know, I like tunes in music more than anything really. But Beck found a way of doing hip-hop for sort of nerdy white guys who like the Beatles. It wasn't really hip-hop, it was pop music with a hip-hop influence. I loved his lyrics, the stream of consciousness thing, the offbeat, wacky poetry. I loved the samples, because the sample stuff that he was doing, that chimes with me because of the dance music I was listening to. So I felt like I was on common ground with him there. But what I loved about him was just his songwriting, just this endlessly inventive way he had with a melody and with a tune. And I loved the fact that his roots were quite hard to trace, but he definitely had a 60s thing going on. You know, clear influence of the Beatles, clear influence from the Stones and Bob Dylan and all these things. But he wrapped it up into a sort of contemporary stew of stuff, which I just found absolutely fantastic. It was really exciting getting into it, because it was kind of like, it was the first time when I properly became conscious, like, wow, you know, we're living in the 90s, this is great 90s music, there's a genuinely great 90s artist, a bit like, you know, the 60s had Bob Dylan, and the 70s had, you know, whoever. Now we've got a great artist for the 90s, Beck. I will do a video at some point. I don't listen to him very much anymore, but we'll get into that at a later date. 97, I thought I'd do another dance one, Daft Punk. This is one of the few dance music, electronic albums from that period which I do genuinely think stands up as a piece of music. I loved this record when it came out. I listened to it a lot at home, which is not true for a lot of those other records that came out at the time. You know, Leftism by Left Field and certain other things. You'd listen to them if you went round to someone's house, and you'd hear them in clubs, but you wouldn't necessarily cue them up in your living room on a Friday evening with a glass of wine. This was different. There was something different about this one. Right from the opening track, which I can't even pronounce, it had a kind of clubby house music vibe to it and a disco thing, which is what I loved. A definite 1970s disco vibe. Lovely warm analogue sounds, beautifully constructed electronic soundscapes, and loads of hooks as well. Loads of tunes, loads of hooks. This song Around the World was a bit annoying. It had a real earworm quality to it, but I remember I had that on a tape in the car and I just wore the tape out. Daft Punk, like I said, they were one of the few bands that were able to translate what was happening in the club scene into a proper sit down and listen to it kind of album. And this was the only record of theirs that I ever got into. I didn't like Discovery. I've not listened to anything they've done since really, but this one I've always been really fond of it. We can hear the washing machine going now, so I apologise for that. Right, this next one, you'll see when I show it, I've not kept the CD in particularly good shape because it's missing its cover. Okay, I'll flash up a picture on the screen of this record. This is the Divine Comedy. This comes from 1998, and it's the album Fin du Siècle. The first album I bought by them was Casanova, and I loved that one. This one, though, I thought was kind of a step on again. Very, very interesting songs. Funny, humorous, ironic. This is the album that's got National Express on it, which is one of the big kind of 90s anthems. Very humorous song about this coach service. You know, in England, I used to use it all the time to get from Leeds down to London, you know, for work and stuff. Really funny lyrics, but there's some other stuff on here which is really interesting. The song Sweden is just magnificent. It's got this very kind of decadent, orchestral kind of sound to it. Something like you'd imagine, something that David Bowie and Tony Visconti would have done back in the day, you know. And the song Eric the Gardener, which is like a kind of Brian Eno very strange sort of mosaic orchestral electronic piece, beautiful, really, really clever. Neil Hannon, definitely a bit of a songwriting genius, and again somebody whose career I didn't particularly follow after this. Personally, I thought he lost his edge a little bit. Didn't lose his way, but the stuff I heard after this, he gradually lost his edge. He became less interesting, I thought. For me, this was a career peak, and I just love this record. So, 1998, Divine Comedy and Fin du siècle. Okay, and we'll finish with one of the other great gigs of my life, and this would have been 1999, and this band had been around for years, and I'd always enjoyed their music. Went to see them live at Leeds University, and it blew the back of my head off. It was amazing. And I saw them a couple of times after this, and it wasn't as good. So I don't know, perhaps I was being, perhaps my head was in a certain space at the time, don't know. Anyway, the album is Middle of Nowhere by Orbital. Two brothers, Phil and Paul Hartrell, doing electronic music from behind a pair of keyboards. But this record, it came in a slipcase. This was so imaginative. I mean, all completely sampled, but really full on. Absolutely full on. The second song, which I don't even remember the name of now, an absolutely crazy assemblage of samples. They used a sample from John Craven's Newsround in it, which was an old children's TV news show from the 1970s and 80s, which I loved. Yeah, just beautiful, spectral, astral, head-trippy music, purely electronic, no lyrics, no vocals, but very cerebral as electronic music goes. It wasn't pounding exactly. It didn't have that thing that Underworld had or Left Field had. It was more kind of brainy electronic club music. And the gig that I saw them do, like I said, in 1999, it was amazing, truly amazing. Yeah, thought I would show that one. Middle of Nowhere by Orbital. And then that's it, we get to the year 2000. Now it's interesting because when we get to the year 2000, that was the decade when I settled down, had a family. Top of the Pops was cancelled round about that time, and from 2000 onwards, my knowledge of music and contemporary music just becomes far more inexact. It just becomes very diffuse, and I couldn't tell you which music was around when, you know. The 90s was the last decade when I was kind of on the ball with everything, and I was buying records as and when they came out, and I was aware that I was living in the here and now. I think from the noughties onwards, I got more into record collecting and checking back into the past again, and I did sort of lose touch with new music to a degree. I still bought new music, but I can't characterise the noughties. I can't, I don't think of them as a musical decade in the way that I think of the 90s and the 80s. So the 90s really was the final phase of that kind of musical appreciation for me personally. Anyway, that's 20 minutes, easily long enough. Take care for now. Bye-bye.